Welcome to NightCAP. It's February 1st.
Time for your weekly dose of commentary, analysis, and politics. I'm Fallon Gallagher.
And I'm James Duran.
Thanks for joining us. And tonight we are joined by Amelia Brown, who is a legal studies major who works for McGuire Woods Consulting. We're also joined by Jamaica Ponder, who is a former intern for Congresswoman Bonnie Watson Coleman, who represents New Jersey 12. And interesting, she was in the news this week, piece in the New Yorker about her wearing red pins for Racy Taylor at the State of the Union address.
She's a badass. She's cool.
Well, thank you both for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Like I just mentioned, President Trump delivered his first State of the Union address to a joint session of Congress Tuesday evening. He struck a largely presidential tone by staying on script, hailing the successes of his first year in office and avoiding political attacks. The New York Times reported on the bipartisan tone and the president's call for unity. Trump challenged Democrats to work with him on immigration and rebuilding the nation's infrastructure. This element from Axios highlights the significant amount of time he spent talking about the economy, immigration, and foreign policy during the speech. As for the prose of the speech itself, perhaps the most memorable line was the president's observation of what he is now calling the new American moment.
Yes, I thought it was an effective speech, to be sure, given what the objectives appeared to be. I think it's safe to say the real key objective was appealing to the sort of 10 to 15% of folks that he seems to have lost based on his approval rating since Inauguration Day. In that sense, I do think it was effective. Again, as Fallon mentioned, there was some good prose, New American moment. I think better than almost any president I can remember, he really uses his guests in the hall to illustrate agenda items. I think better than almost anyone. I disagreed with the objective itself, that is appealing to those folks instead of sort of what the speech was billed as by the White House, which was a unifying bipartisan speech. I think besides some lip service to that note in a blue tie, I thought it was fairly short on bipartisanship, short on unity. And I think most importantly for me, Fallon, just from a strategic standpoint, I think they mismanaged expectations ahead of this speech. Of course, as we mentioned, that's how the speech was being sold for the week leading up to it, the day leading up to it. And instead, we didn't really get that. And so it kind of offered the media the easy criticism, the easy way out of this wasn't a unifying speech, this wasn't a bipartisan speech, instead of actually giving substantive criticism of the good moments of the speech. So all in all, kind of a mixed bag, but I do think it was, was an effective speech.
And I wonder if they hadn't spent so much time hailing it as a bipartisan speech, if they just focused on the speech itself, I wonder how that would have changed the feedback. I mean, he definitely stayed on script. He followed his lines. He didn't call anybody out. There was no tweeting, I think, for at least 24 hours after the speech. I don't think I saw a tweet until today.
Right, no allegations of wiretapping like we got last time after.
Exactly,
guys,
which breaks the pattern. I think it definitely breaks the pattern. I know every time that we've applauded him for staying on prompter like that, within 48 hours, he has gone on one of his craziest tweet storms.
So far capitalized, or not ruined sort of the good news cycle yet.
Yeah, some progress.
Jamaica, your thoughts?
Well, I kind of find it hard to take anything that really comes out of the president's mouth seriously at this point, especially since I know that he's not really talking to a very large demographic. That speech was not for anyone whose politics don't directly align with his. And then furthermore, like what you were just saying about the whole staying on script thing, like he's not writing his own speeches. And so I know that that's not necessarily genuine. It's not, I don't know. I find it difficult to applaud him for staying on script because that's not his job. His job is to be a unifying element of the country, and I don't know. I wasn't impressed by the speech. I didn't really think it said anything nuanced or interesting. So.
To be fair, though, most presidents don't actually write their own speeches. You know, Cody Keenan, Northwestern alumni, he wrote President Obama's speeches.
Well, he had a stable of speechwriters. Your thoughts on it?
I love it. You know, I really think that I actually kind of disagree with this idea that he was going to try to be bipartisan. I frankly think that Donald Trump is scared. He's thinking about 2018. He's thinking about these upcoming elections and with Congress. And I think he really was trying to appeal to a base that he's terrified of losing. Because if he loses Congress, then, this past year has been incredibly difficult in terms of passing certain types of legislature that he wants to have. We've had a government shutdown, and that's having an all-Republican executive branch and legislative one. So I think in many ways he's trying to appeal to the voters that voted for him in 2016 and say, look at all this progress. There's still so much to be done. He makes these these stories are incredibly powerful emotionally, and I really think that that's what his strongest suit was in 2016, was this emotional appeal. And so I think that's what we saw.
What do we all think of, I know that we talked on NNN about how there were 5 Democratic responses, but what do we all think of Congressman Joe Kennedy III's speech, rebuttal rather? And also picking him, right? So there's 2 elements.
It's an interesting choice.
Yeah, okay. I do have a bit to say about that. I think that I enjoyed it for the, I guess, cinematic presence that it had, because I did think that everything in politics, of course, is
well staged.
Right, exactly. It's a performance.
What were your thoughts on the open hood of the car behind him? Do you think that added a nice element to it?
Right, and that's the sort of thing that I'm talking about. So like, no message is ever just delivered anymore, but I do think that he made a good point as it pertains to like the necessity of unifying the country, and I liked that he harped on that a little bit, I guess, just because I think that that's something that would otherwise go, not unsaid, but just be assumed as something that needs to happen, but it needs to be explicitly stated so that people on both sides of the aisle understand that this back and forth refusal to work with one another is not going to work. It hasn't worked, like you referenced. It results in government shutdowns, no matter how short they are, still embarrassing and unnecessary.
Right, so I thought it was an effective speech, or I thought it was one of the best rebuttals that we've seen in a long time, but just quickly, Jamaica, I'm curious your thoughts on actually selecting Congressman Kennedy instead of, say, one of the up-and-coming
Kamala Harris
presidential
or Cory
hopefuls.
Booker.
Okay, I actually think that having a person of color might have been, it would have delivered differently.
Nice contrast.
Yeah, and I also think that having somebody like maybe a freshman or a sophomore would have also, it would have been a new face. And I think that that's something that the American people, even though Donald Trump is considered to be, new, not like old politics, not swamp, like they're always looking for something new and something fresh. And not that, Joe Kennedy isn't great or whatever, but it's, and I'm not trying to trash him in any way, but I think that it could have, like our demographic probably would have had more interest if they brought in somebody who was fresh and interesting. And
Amelia, your thoughts on it?
The fact of the matter is, and I think it's something that many people, Democrats such as myself, are aware of, is that the Democratic Party as a leadership is looking for a new face. They want to unify a party that has been fractured by a very tumultuous 2016 presidential election. And so I think Joe Kennedy, in many ways, is potentially the answer they're kind of trying to look for. He's young, he's only 37 years old, he's a representative, had experience in the Peace Corps, he seems to be very much, had a viral video with his response about healthcare, very much pro-transgender rights, and then he has that famous last name.
Well, and that's the thing, it makes me wonder, are we going to see another President Kennedy in the future? Certainly not in 2020,
Unlikely.
but then that makes me think, would the Democrats have fared better if they had chosen one of these names who we think are probably going to be running for the nomination in 2020. I know right now we have John Delaney's announced, but that's the only one. We know that there's probably at least 3 or 4 other.
15 or 16, 17.
I mean, I named 2 of them 20 seconds ago, but I wonder how it would have been different if they had chosen one of those people to give the speech. Do you have any thoughts?
I mean, I'm really not sure. I think Joe Kennedy definitely has a Senate run in his future, so I think before we even talk about the presidency with him, that will definitely be in his future. But I think in terms of thinking about 2020, I come back to this idea that I think that the Democratic Party leadership is just fishing to try to unify and appeal to white working voters again. And so, he'd made the mention, Fallon, about like the car in the back, and he wasn't wearing like a suit jacket, like he had the rolled up sleeves, like he wanted
casual cool guy.
Yeah, he wanted to give this like
It was
working
worth $18 million.
Yeah, like he has like a trust fund of like $5 million, and
Never worked outside of the public sector.
Right, and so not to discredit him and like the work that he's done, but it's, as you pointed out, Jamaica, messages are never accidental. Like everything is always chosen, and so to me, I feel like Joe Kennedy was more a reflection of the Democratic Party's goals as opposed to, just trying to appeal nationally again.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things, just to kind of button up this, this topic, I think the other place that the speech was lacking was policy specifics. I think I, for one, was looking for a lot of that. And as a conservative, Ramesh Ponnaroo, one of my favorite policy guys, wrote in National Review last week sort of a laundry list of what a Republican agenda might look like. And I was really hoping, certainly not for all of this, but Ramesh talks about a long-term healthcare fix, right? Folks are going to see their healthcare premiums go up as a result of eliminating the individual mandate. So there's still a lot of things on the table that they have to resolve before they can even sort of start to do more positive things in the style of the tax bill. I do think the tax bill will have a nice effect and sort of mitigate what looks like right now a wave. I think that'll sort of close the gap a little bit. But overall, I was left a little bit. I was sort of still asking for a little bit more on those things at the end of the day.
And then just going off of that, also talking about the agenda, we were talking about the midterms a lot on here, and it seems like the Democrats, it's very likely that they are going to take over the House in these midterm elections. So I'm curious for both of your perspectives, assuming that DACA gets done, what should be at the top of the to-do list for the Democrats for the rest of 2018? Amelia?
Oh man, so first of all, before we even assume that DACA gets done, I very much want to. I do think it's going to happen, but we do have to go through another deadline with the budget, and February 9th is coming up, and so to me that's still a big hurdle. And also, I don't know about you guys, but I am still shook by 2016, and so as much as I want to believe that, the Democrats are going to take back the House and ideally take back Congress, but there's still work to be done, and so I'm much more still I'm still in campaign mode.
We're seeing that generic ballot sort of compress a little bit the margin that the Democrats had built, sort of coming back closer to parity.
Certainly. We're going to have to leave it there really quickly. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with more NightCAP in a minute.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. With our colors flying, we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
NightCAP last week, women are marching on Washington in a new way. A record number of women are running for political office in the wake of the Me Too movement. These women were the subject of a Time magazine cover titled The Avengers, and Medill alum Rebecca Traister also wrote about this phenomenon in New York Magazine, interviewing over 200 female candidates across the country. We spoke to her editor, Lori Abraham, about this piece earlier this week. Let's take a look. Joined by Lori Abraham, who was Rebecca Traister's editor for that piece in New York Magazine. Lori, thank you so much for joining us. So I want to talk to you a little bit more about this piece. You guys pulled together a variety of interviews from female candidates across the entire country. How exactly did you guys go about doing that and put together such a cohesive piece?
Rebecca Traister, the writer, has been following feminism and women in politics for a long time. So she probably at least 4 months ago started, talking to organizations like Emily's List and some other ones that the names aren't as well known about who was running, started contacting candidates, and it became pretty clear that there were huge numbers of women running. At first there was a lot of information about how women were contacting those groups and saying, can I run? Should I run? How do I run? But then, she has those numbers in there that 390 women are planning to run for the House right now, which is a huge jump, and 49 compared to the same time in the election cycle for the last midterm election. And then 49 women running for the Senate. So it was just talking to lots of candidates.
And Lori, let's assume for a minute that these women are part of what looks to be a wave in November. From Rebecca's reporting, do you get the sense that they will form a new bloc on Capitol Hill or sort of fold into the Democratic caucus in a traditional sense?
I don't know if there'll be a new bloc. I think that they are pretty progressive Democratic, so that I would expect that they would be part of that coalition. We do compare them in a sense to the Tea Party and talk about how some of the women are very alienated from the Democratic Party. There is some separation between a lot of these female candidates in the Democratic Party, but I'm actually not expecting that they're going to be the kind of blocking force that the Tea Party was even for Republicans. But that's right. Maybe I'm wrong. Women are. There is some empirical evidence that women do a better job of reaching across the aisle. But sometimes I'm skeptical of that kind of sort of essentialist talk about women, despite the evidence that they are different than male politicians.
And on a final note, do you think it's enough for women to be supporting these female candidates just because they're women, or don't you think that we should be applying the same sort of nuance that we'd be applying to male candidates?
Yeah, you should. I mean, it turns out that you can check. There may be reasons that you decide, in a head-to-head race with two very similar candidates to vote for the girl, right? But if you're a woman, but basically no. It's like, as she says in the piece, you can have a woman who's Elizabeth Warren, and maybe that appeals to you, or you can have a woman who's Sarah Palin. Now, the same people are not going to be voting, women or men, for Sarah Palin and Elizabeth Warren in the main. So no, it's not enough, but it's. The idea is they're coming from not traditional political paths, bringing maybe a fresh kind of perspective.
All right. Thank you so much, Lori Abraham, editor for New York Magazine, for speaking with us today. We really appreciate it.
All right, Jamaica, I want to come to you first. What are your reactions to what Lori had to say?
I really like the point that she made about the Sarah Palin versus the Elizabeth Warrens, and I think it's really pertinent because you can't have all these women who run for public office, but at the end of the day, if you don't have diversity, and I mean that in every sense of the word, socioeconomic, racial, in terms of whether ability, that's going to dictate the type of legislation that they're promoting. It's going to dictate the way in which they vote, whether or not they're reaching across the aisle, and really who they're representing. So just being a woman is definitely not enough to get someone's vote, or it shouldn't be.
And Amelia, what do you think about that? She mentioned the Sarah Palin and Elizabeth Warren types. Do you think that we should be supporting these female candidates just because they're women, or is that enough for you?
I think it's difficult. It's yes and no. On the one hand, no, it's not because of ideological purposes. I won't support someone who's aligned with someone like Sarah Palin compared to Elizabeth Warren. But on the other hand, I do greatly appreciate this momentum that's happening, and I really think that we are witnessing the definition of grassroots movement. And I think she mentioned the Tea Party movement as well as another example. And also on another note, I want to see this happening on the state levels as well, more women who are House representatives and House senators at every single state. And we need more governors who are women as well. So it's great to see it federally. Would love to see it statewide and locally as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we asked Lori about this, how concentrated a lot of these candidates are, particularly toward the Elizabeth Warren side of the spectrum, and sort of what that would look like, because a lot of these candidates are running in districts like New Jersey 5, California 39 districts that are traditionally, very competitive and recently very Republican. And so for me, part of being a great candidate, right, is being a great fit for your district. And so I'm curious of your all's thoughts on whether that's important. Essentially, does it matter that they win in November, or is it just sort of a good sign to see how many of them are running? Jamaica?
It would be lovely if they could win. But I also think that the fact that they are running ups the chances. The probability instantly goes up when people familiarize themselves with candidates who are women, and that's not something that you typically see, on your television screen or on your ballot in front of you when you're voting. And so if people can start to become more comfortable with the idea of seeing women in positions of power, then I think that will materialize itself into actually seeing them being elected. And so that whole push is the first step to seeing actual change in the demographics of our elected office.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. Amelia?
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I think too it'll be wonderful to see voters, particularly male voters, also believe and internalize this idea that women can represent them, because I feel like there could be this idea, not all men, but previously, that a woman, if she's going to be in office, is going to represent women's issues, whatever that may be. And I want to see a narrative change where, regardless of what gender you are, you can represent your constituents faithfully and truthfully.
Val, one thing we noticed, and certainly Lori made this point, sort of outside of the interview, was that just the sheer number of Democratic women running versus Republican women running make it difficult on the author, Rebecca Tracer. But no Republicans interviewed.
Which is tough and a little bit odd, I think, from a journalistic standpoint. You want a variety of sources. You want to get all sides of the story. I find it hard. Well, you know, they had the one video.
Right, of the progressive conservative, right?
No, she was, I think, a progressive millennial.
Is that, she might not even been a conservative. Anyways, so right, I think
that
from
was
a
their one
journalistic
Republican,
standpoint,
though.
maybe, but you had another angle to this.
Yeah, you know, the thing that I thought was a little bit odd about it, I am first to admit I would consider myself a feminist. But I think we are seeing a double standard with Republican candidates and Republican elected leaders and other politicians. You know, we saw this week with Nikki Haley, who Michael Wolff, we all have heard about Fire and Fury. Michael Wolff made some implications that Nikki Haley was having an affair with President Trump. Completely unbased claims, wrong, but
He didn't even find them credible enough to put them in the book. He just used them.
And we all know how many errors that
show
book
that
had in that book.
spilling.
But I think it's really surprising that hardly any of these big name feminist leaders came out in defense of her, spoke about how wrong this was, and this just wouldn't fly with other. I don't know. I think that we're seeing a double standard with the political parties of these women.
Yeah, I think it's tough. I mean, final thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, you can't be a feminist and not represent all women's rights. And I think, good job, Fallon. We have to start calling them out on it because they, parade around and preach all these wonderful things, but then at the end of the day, they can't reach across the aisle when it's no longer partisan, when it's just like basic human decency.
Right, and also to be fair, Micah Brzezinski did kick off Michael Wolff today on her show.
So
that was mine,
basically about
missed
Nikki
it.
Haley. Yeah, so
it
we
sounds
are
like we'll hear
seeing,
more about
and
that
then there's
in a
like
minute.
jokes now, like on more conservative media, basically being like, oh, like the liberal media is now attacking, Michael Wolff. So because they're standing up for a woman.
Because all media is partisan.
Yes.
Well, it just goes to show you it's a little dangerous when you start, playing up a book that has a lot of falsehoods in it because you never know what might be in there. So.
All right. Well, we wanted to jump to your favorite segment.
Well, we want to jump to a segment that we heard a lot about, a lot of good news about. A lot of people liked our extra segment last week. And this
the ratings. We love the ratings.
The best ratings. This week, we got another one for you. So all of us face this situation regularly. You walk into a coffee shop, there's no table. You sort of get tabs on who's up and who's looking for a table too. Maybe some of us take it a little too far, and that's the subject of this week's Extra. Dean Marriott, Russell Marriott. Well, sorry, those glasses.
Yeah,
really
the new look. I'm sorry.
So Russell Marriott, tell us about what happened at Backlot Coffee this past Sunday for this week's Extra.
Yeah, of course. So, I went to Backlot with you actually, and we went to grab a table. And unfortunately, it was pretty packed, but we were able to snag one when we saw a guy leaving. And so we stole the table. But before we could get the table, we actually asked him and approached him and asked him for the if we can use it. But then two other gentlemen actually asked the same guy if he can use the table. And there was like some kind of brief altercation that was really not a big deal. But at the same time, it was kind of traumatizing because I had a massive sling on, and these two gentlemen actually were upset with the fact that we took the table.
What did
over
the
them.
one gentleman say to you?
He actually said to me, he actually approached me and suggested that we should have an altercation.
Right, I believe, didn't he say, "You're lucky that my friend isn't into physical confrontation"?
Yes, that's exactly what he said.
He sounded
Thanks
like
for
he
reminding
wanted to throw hands.
Yeah, I was really in the moment, and I actually forgot about that part.
Yeah, and Russ, people say you're tall and lanky, but this guy, he was 6'5", maybe 125.
Yeah, and for me, like.
Finally, Russ, are you hurt or injured?
Oh, I'm pretty hurt. Okay. I'm pretty hurt emotionally and
all right, well, that's all we have for Extra.
So.
Basically, people are fighting over coffee tables in Evanston. Who knew it?
Yep, seriously.
Thanks, Russell.
Yep, of course.
Okay, well, that was a lot, but we're going to take a quick break. If you're enjoying the conversation, you can follow along on social media at NightCAP NU.
And if you're really enjoying the conversation and want to join us, send us a message. Back with more NightCAP in a minute.
At Northwestern, we're Wildcats in every way.
Northwestern break right through that. we will cheer you all to go. Go you Northwestern, fight for victory, sweet victory, spread for the fame of our fair name, and go Northwestern, win that game. Go Cats!
At the top of this hour, we were discussing the State of the Union, but how is the state of the state? Governor Rauner delivered his 30-minute address in Springfield last night. He highlighted the divisive nature of Illinois state politics, saying, quote, "Where we once joined to address our problems, we now divide to conquer the other side." He did call for bipartisan efforts to improve the state's economy. He did not, however, lay out specific policy proposals to address these issues. James, I know you've got a lot of thoughts on this one.
Well, I think to the latter point about a lack of policy specifics, I think traditionally that is done in 2 weeks' time in the budget address, which has really taken on sort of even more importance than the state of the state, given the budget or lack thereof in Illinois. And, you know, I thought that there were a few things from the speech. I mean, certainly you mentioned he struck sort of a bipartisan sort of friendly tone. It was not necessarily received in that way. I think similar to the reaction to Trump's State of the Union, sort of the reactions from Democrats, you know, Pritzker, Biss, Kennedy, as well as lawmakers down in Springfield, was basically predetermined before the speech even started. But certainly, you know, we do hope that they can maybe feel the pressure of an election year and maybe think that they might want to get some things done on both sides. Some quick reaction, J.B. Pritzker, far and away leading candidate, talking about how Governor Rauner takes credit for the education funding formula and sort of criticizing that angle, which I thought actually was a bit unfair, sort of one of the real accomplishments of Rauner's first year, that education reform bill, school choice. And then just one other thing, Fallon, one thing that caught me this week, a new poll out from We Ask America indicating that our local state senator, Daniel Biss, is slightly into second place, sending Chris Kennedy into third, but of course both of them are far behind J.B. Pritzker.
Yeah, I mean, based on my brief time when I was covering some of this Illinois governor primary stuff, it seems like we can just assume it's going to be JB at this point.
Yeah, I think that's fair, and I think we'll see how that plays out. Certainly, a lot of different factions in the Democratic Party in Illinois, and it'll be interesting to see if he can consolidate all that.
All right. Well, for more on that Illinois state politics, we're going to take a deeper dive on that next week on NightCAP. But before we go, we want to turn to one of our favorite segments. In case you missed it, our panel is going to break it down and let you know what you missed this week. Jamaica, let's start with you.
Okay, so we already touched upon it briefly, but Michael Wolff, who is the author of Fire and Fury, the new book about Trump and the White House as it is currently, was kicked off of Morning Joe right in the middle of the broadcast for what we called slandering and defaming Nikki Haley and just really perpetuating these allegations and these completely,
to sell books.
Right, to sell books.
Wild.
And no factual basis. Like you said earlier, James, like so lacking in factual basis that it couldn't actually be published.
In his Rag of Lies book.
Yeah, and so, and he then, what's really interesting is he went on Twitter immediately after and then started slandering the anchors on Morning Joe, just like
No surprise there.
President Trump had previously done.
Amelia,
So,
Amelia, what do you have?
So what I actually thought was really interesting was 2 minutes before Rauner gave his State of the State address, actually the Illinois legislature overruled Rauner's veto on school funding. So it was interesting because, James, you pointed out how that was kind of one of his, big accomplishments the past year, and yet he's still very much struggling within his own.
And real quick, I just want to get to mine really fast. One of the best memes that I saw to come out of the State of the Union address was this one, which is Trump playing his new hit song, Border Wall, which is a fun remake of Oasis's Wonderwall, one of my favorite songs.
Right, that guy in the bar who just wants to play Wonderwall when no one else wants to hear it.
Honestly, Wonderwall was probably my favorite song in middle school and is still one of my favorite songs now. It's a great one. But unfortunately, that's all the time that we have for you guys tonight. If that wasn't enough of a nightcap, it's only 8:30, so you have plenty of time to keep talking.
Or not. We'll see you next week. Thanks.